I would repeal DoddFrank, right? I mean, that's just a real problem. I mean, why do we got into the problem we did because we created all sorts of incentives for people to do the things they did. For example, what happens when you have zero interest rates? You got to look for a way to find return. How do you find return? You got to leverage, right? I mean, if you keep it at 0% interest rates, I got to leverage in order to make this thing work. Well, where can you leverage easily? Housing market, right? So I create this incentive to do what? To go out and create a bubble in housing, which we do. We have Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac buying the mortgages. So if I'm countrywide, what am I incentivized to do? I'm going to go out and create millions of mortgages if I can. Then we have SEC regulations that say Tier 1 capital is AAA rated by only 3 companies, right? Moody's, Fitch, and S&P. So what's the incentive to do? Create AAA mortgages or AAA securities. So that's one of the reasons we're making so darn many mortgage-backed securities, because everybody wanted to hold them as Tier 1 capital. So you create all these incentives to do crazy things, and then when they do them, then you say, oh my gosh, Wall Street's run amok. Let's have a 2,300-page bill to deal with it. So what we need to do is say, hey, let's create the incentives the proper way, right? You have people own a share of the mortgage, right? You can't pass the whole thing off. Make banks not be able to leverage so much. Have different capital requirements, or just get rid of the FDIC. Then people would say, oh my gosh, maybe we should pay attention, right? Limit, this federal regulation on the EPA, and, that's just another thing run amok. It's interesting that Hayek in the Constitution of Liberty in 1960 said, if what happens is the legislative branch gives all sorts of authority over to the executive branch, it will never be able to get it back, and it won't be able to keep control of it. And that was before the EPA existed, right? So that we need to say, oh, we're not going to just pass laws that say let there be clean air, and then you guys all take care of it, right? So you're going to have to first of all stick to Article 1, Section 8, only pass things that you have enumerated powers for, but certainly eliminating the regulation, and then reform the income and corporate income tax. I mean, that's a huge problem. The corporate income tax, we have the second highest corporate income tax rate in the world. And so what happens? So then you come in and you try to get your piece to get out, right? Maybe you don't have the votes to lower the corporate income tax rate, but you can bury in a 2,300-page bill an exemption for your company that nobody even knows that it's for your company, right? So what happens is it's very complicated corporate income tax because the rates are so darn high. Just cut the rates and get rid of all these exemptions. And the same thing happens in the personal income tax. There's no reason personal income tax can't be something simple, And right now, 48% of all filers don't pay any tax, don't pay any positive income tax. I mean, that's goofy, right? They don't have the same thing as countrywide when they're sold off the mortgage. They got no reason to say, oh, don't pass that thing, right? Give it to me. That's great. I don't pay for it. So I would make it so that everybody has to pay something, so that they have a say. Just one last quick aside. I'm driving along with my son, who's in high school, and he goes, and this thing came on that Romney, he did his tax thing, and then he paid $3 million in taxes. And my son goes, man, that doesn't sound fair. How could anybody have to pay $3 million in taxes? There ought to be a limit on how much somebody should pay in taxes. So, poor Romney's over here. Everybody's trying to tell him he's not paying his fair share. My son's thinking he's paying way more than his fair share. Right? So, what's going to happen? Well, the economy's going to do pretty well, right? I mean, when I said 2.5% growth, but it's not going to do well because of what the administration is doing or what the Congress is doing. It's going to do well in spite of itself. Let me read you from Adam Smith's book, An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of Wealth of Nations, just as a closer. He says, the natural effort of every individual to better his own condition, when suffered to exert itself with freedom and security, is so powerful a principle that it is alone and without any assistance, not only capable of carrying on the society to wealth and prosperity, but of surmounting 100 impertinent obstructions with which the folly of human laws too often encumbers its operations, though the effect of these obstructions is always more or less either to encroach upon its freedom or to diminish its security. So what was he saying? He's saying, you know what? This market capitalist system that I'm just, starting to write about, this thing is so powerful, it's going to overcome all these laws that the government is doing to goof it up. And that's what's going to happen. We're going to see slightly falling unemployment, we're going to see a growth in employment, and we're going to see the economy still productive. Why? Because of what Adam Smith said. Individuals going around, acting according to their own plan, will be able to overcome much of what government is doing. So with that, I'll take some questions.
Passing out the, we got a hand over here. Okay, we got somebody coming, great. So if you want to ask a question, raise your hand, we'll get you a card, fill it out, we'll get the card back to you, and it's going to work very well. Okay. Do you have the first one? Okay.
All right.
Can you hear that? Recently, we've read about 1.77 million people that dropped out of the labor market in January of this year. Is the administration cooking the book to reduce unemployment rates? What would unemployment rate be if so many people had not left the job market?
Well, yeah, there's one of the things that happens, and these are the discouraged workers that I were talking about. People who just stop looking for work, like my friends may end up doing next year. Again, if you add the 8.1 million people that are unemployed for part-time reason, then you get unemployment numbers up around 17, 18%, maybe pushing 20%. But nonetheless, I do think that the economy is a little bit stronger than some folks are saying. I think you are getting growth in the job market, but simply because, we're just so productive.
You mentioned that government is borrowing from the Federal Reserve. How can we borrow from ourselves?
Yeah, how do we borrow from ourselves? Well, the Federal Reserve, when it buys a bond, U.S. Treasury spends $1,000 more than it takes in. It goes out and issues a bond. The Federal Reserve goes out and it just creates money out of thin air, right? It either creates, it could conceivably create Federal Reserve notes, which it doesn't generally do. But what it does is it creates a reserve for that bank. If the bank gives up, the bank takes that bond, and the Federal Reserve then buys it from the bank, and it sticks $1,000 in reserves of banks, which is one reason that you've seen what's called the balance sheet of the Fed has grown, and all that $1.5 trillion is sitting out there in excess reserves. That's coming in. Let's say if what happens is the Fed gave you $1,000 for the bond, you'd run around and put it in the bank, and then what would happen is the reserves of your bank would go up. So it ends up in the reserves of banks. That's really what's going on. They're just creating it out of thin air.
Where do you see happening to this country if Obama wins a second term?
Well, I think I'm just going to have to go back to Adam Smith. We will be poorer than we otherwise would be. But if Obama wins a second term, but the Republicans control both houses, then you'll at least know that the rules of the game probably aren't going to change very much. And that certainty alone will make the world better off. I think it's crucial that the Republicans gain control of both houses. But if you had a non-Obama administration, then we would be almost invariably we'd be wealthier, and particularly the poor would be wealthier.
Some say unemployment will stay high because we are importing workers, legal of course, faster than we are creating jobs. Isn't this a major factor?
No. Look, there's just not a fixed amount of jobs out there, right? I mean, if what happened was there's a fixed supply of jobs, then what would happen is if somebody came in, they could take my job away, right? But there's not a fixed supply of jobs. In fact, I would bet you that if you looked at 60% of the jobs that are out there today weren't there when I was born, right? I mean, they didn't even have calculators when I was born. I'm that old. So, I mean, lots and lots of jobs out there. The economy, I mean, that's what Schumpeter talked about. You know, the markets are creative destruction. Same thing with shipping jobs to China, right? Go down to Long Beach Harbor and see how many shipped containers you have to say jobs on them, right? Shipping off to China. They don't. What happens is you move capital to China. Capital moves to low wage places. Capital's going to move, if what happens is you can move capital, machinery, buildings, that kind of stuff, if you can move it, it will flow towards where the low wages are. Now when I was a kid, made in Japan meant cheap, shoddy stuff made with cheap labor. Today, labor costs in Japan are higher than they are in the United States. Why is that? Because we moved all sorts of capital to where all the labor is. The problem in Mexico is that now that China is accepting capital, we don't have to worry about that. The problem in Mexico is that we don't, the system's so goofed up that it's hard to move capital there. So what happens is the low-wage labor moves this way. So the solution is not to try to build a wall 50 miles high and off to infinity. You know, I come from a state that's a border state, right? The Frostbacks don't all come in from Canada, right? We don't have, we're not building a wall across Montana and upper Michigan, right? It's not like the world's tilted somehow, which is why it's moving in from the south, right? Low-wage labor is flowing to the capital. And if you can move capital across borders, what happens? The labor stays where the capital is going.
Why is the stock market doing so well?
Well, I think the stock market's doing well because people are seeing that there's the uncertainty has gone down a little bit in terms of what's going to happen to the economy. The economy is stabilized, and so investors tend to move in herds, and so I think the economy doing better has made it, and I'm going to suspect that the stock market, there could be a blow up in Europe and maybe the whole world comes to an end or something. But other than that, I think we're going to get decent growth in the stock market as well. Maybe, I'm going to say 8-10% growth in the stock market. But
Indiana.
That's where what you guys just paid for it, that advice.
Can I take your word for it and go out and buy it?
Right. What does that say? Past performance does not mean whatever.
Indiana recently passed a right-to-work labor law. What are your comments about that?
Yeah, Indiana just passed a right-to-work law, and I think that's going to put pressure on Michigan to do that. I mean, what does right-to-work say? I mean, right-to-work just basically says to get a job, you don't have to pay union dues. Right? I mean, that's basically what it says. But it's not as big as it used to be, because only about 7% of the private sector labor force is unionized. Because markets work, okay? And so, where's the growth in the labor market? I mean, in labor unions, it's in the public sector. That's your real problem, is these public sector unions, which even Samuel Gompers said you shouldn't have public sector labor unions. But it's important, but it's not as important as it would have been 15 years ago.
$7 to $10 trillion of sovereign debt needs to be rolled over in 2012. How is this going to happen without increasing interest rates and still make capital available for the private sector?
Yeah, the way governments work is they're borrowing short term, and then they never generate enough revenue over their expenditures to pay the stuff off. So what happens is they just borrow again. And that can work as long as everybody believes in it. Now, I think if we're talking about foreign debt, if we're talking about Greece, etc., the pigs, Portugal, Italy, Greece, and Spain, I think that's a little bit of a problem for them. that's going to put real pressure on them, but I think that looks like the austerity programs may get pushed through there. Now for us, I think that it's not going to push up interest rates as much as people might have believed, although, see, I shorted long-term treasuries a while back because I wasn't thinking this through. What's going to happen, so that tells you it's the stock advice, but what's going on in this is that the Federal Reserve is going to go out and buy that debt. But other people will still buy that debt because it's the thing about foreign debt is it's like the two guys that are in camp in the tent, right? And a grizzly bear starts ripping at the side of the tent, and the one guy starts putting on his running shoes, and the other guy says, well, what are you doing that for? You can't outrun a grizzly bear. And he says, I don't have to outrun the bear, I just got to outrun you. So we just have, I mean, people are still going to buy U.S. treasuries if the alternative is buying Russian debt or even Chinese debt, right? Because even though you sort of know what the rules of the game are in China, you still there, you know, something could blow up over there in terms of their government.
What about the uneven playing field with other countries like China that has resulted in a loss of jobs like manufacturing in the U.S.?
Yeah, I think this is a mistake here. Think about it. About a third of what we import from China is made into stuff here in the United States, right? We're actually importing a whole lot of stuff over here. But second of all, suppose that what happened is that tomorrow the Chinese just decided that they were going to give us all a new car, right? Come Valentine's Day, every American gets a new car. You guys all be going, oh, that's going to destroy the automobile industry. In the United States, we can't let them do that. We can't let them be giving us cars. Why would we think that it's bad if what happens that the Chinese government somehow taxes its populace to give us stuff, either stuff, right, like cars, or give us the materials that be put into other stuff, right? We should let them give everything to us, right? And then we'll just, we'll do something else. Now, if you are making cars, you're working in the auto industry and you're 58 years old, and the Chinese give us all new cars every year, well, that'll be a bummer for you. But nobody was talking, not one person ever come up to me and said, hey, what happened to all those people that worked in the Underwood typewriter factory? Right? No one ever talks about that. So I think, yeah, don't worry about it. If the Chinese want to give us stuff, God love them.
It's fair.
Yeah.
What is your prognosis for high-tax, ultra-liberal, heavily unionized California?
Well, I moved away from California in 1976. And I didn't move back. So, yeah, California has a whole host of problems. But primarily it's a problem of, A, making promises that you can't keep to your labor unions, to your public sector unions, right? I mean, look, my dad retired from the state of California. He was a range improvement specialist for Division of Forestry, now Department of Forestry, whatever it is. He retired younger than I am, right? I'm going to go visit him tonight, or drive to Fresno tonight, visit him tomorrow, right? He's 85 years old. My mom's 82 years old. He's been retired for 25 years. How in the world can that work, right? How can it possibly be that you guys have been paying his pension, and for my mom and her health care and his health care and her hip replacement and every other darn thing? I mean, it's great for me. I'm not complaining, right? Don't get me wrong. But, this doesn't make sense. You need to move towards a defined contribution program for your teachers and your public employees.
Illegal immigrants increase the cost of our public schools, welfare programs, medical costs, prisons, and unemployment benefits. How can we get government to enforce immigration laws?
Yeah, look, the problem isn't illegal immigrants. The problem is what happens is you guys are setting up a buffet in the back of the room. Now, think about this. There was a buffet right there, right? There was a buffet back there. Didn't cost anything. Suppose that what happened was Lynn went out and announced to everybody all over San Jose, hey, free buffet, come on in. And then they all started showing up. Would we say, oh my gosh, what are you guys doing? No. If someone walks into this room and what they do is they produce more stuff than they consume, we're better off, right? It's only if they come into this room and they produce less stuff than they consume and someone else isn't giving their share to them voluntarily that we're worse off. Your problem is you find the people that are actually producing more stuff than they consume, those are the ones you catch. You go out and tell the employers who are employing these people to go throw them out of here. And then what you do is you say, oh my gosh, if you don't work and don't get caught and you get your kid into the public school, hey, you're good to go. No wonder you got what you got, right? You just don't give stuff to people that don't pay taxes. You know, it's that simple. And if they want to come in, and you know what how the Romans used to do it? The Romans did it where you could become a Roman citizen by joining the army, right? That's what I would do. I mean, if I was in charge of dealing with illegal immigration, that's what I'd do. I'd say, everybody, hey, you want to become legal? Join the army, right? And so you got to look at incentives. You are not going to stop illegal immigration if what you do is you don't let capital flow to Mexico and you set up a buffet in the back of the room and just let you let people come in and think about this. When I was a kid, we had a Becero program. I was living in Fresno, right? But a Becero program. And what would happen is if you were from Mexico, you would come in and you would work in the fields, right? And then you could go back to Mexico. Now what happens is, you can't do that, right? If you get in here, you can't go back. So what do? You bring your kids. You bring your wife, right? Because you can't go back to them. So then what happens? They're all sitting right here, right? And they're not going. So now you get these communities of illegals. Okay? Matt, what's the problem? Well, they don't have any police protection, basically, right? Government's not going to protect their life, liberty, and property. Because if someone steals something, they can say, oh, gee, go help me protect. Oh, yeah, well, you're an illegal, now you've got a problem. So what happens? The incentives work, right? So the private sector develops protection, private protection. What is that? Join a gang, right? So what do you get? You get instead of having some worker come in, work for a while, go back, you have whole families coming in who don't have any proper police protection, so then you have gangs showing up, and then you get this whole silly business going on. You should go back to the Becero program that we had, in the 60s.
Do you think Obama's policies are intentionally constructed to weaken the country in order to increase dependency upon the government?
I think really Obama believes, and I think if you just read his stuff, you look back, Obama believes that we should have a socialist system. Because the way the socialist system works is, as Bastiat talks about in the law in 1850, says, the socialists have a view of the world that they would like it to be. And if you guys all run around and act according to your own plan, right, if you're free, you're going to goof that up. You're not going to buy electric cars, you're going to have toilets that flush too much water, and you can have all sorts of bad things going on. So it is my role as the central planner to go out and figure out, what'll happen. Well, oh my gosh, you guys won't buy health care, and you should buy it, right? Or you won't cover autism, or it won't cover psychological care or something, and you guys just aren't smart enough. If you're left to your own devices, you won't do it that way. So I think he really wants to do it that way. I mean, he really thinks that we need to have a czar. I mean, that's why these things are there, right? He created all these czars to tell us how we should behave in order to make the world come out in the way that he wants it. And, this hope and change thing that he had going.
Do you see the dollar not being accepted as a reserve currency, and what will happen if it is not?
No, I think the dollar is going to be accepted world currency. I mean, the reason that we can inflate and other places can't is because people are going to sell oil and sell all sorts of stuff in dollars. The difficulty of moving to another currency is enormous. Just like, you know, we just got to outrun the euro, right? I mean, basically. And I don't know if you've been following Europe, but that thing's a little bit of a problem, right? Because we're not going to start using this, you know, what could we possibly use? I mean, there's not enough Swiss currency out there. I mean, this is not another reasonable currency. We even have to do Weimar Republic sort of thing in order to have it be replaced with a pound sterling or something. So I don't think that's going to happen. I think what Bernanke thinks he's going to do is, right now, one of the reasons they're holding $1.5 trillion in excess reserves is because he's paying interest on excess reserves. That started in September of 2008, first time they ever did that. So I think what's going to happen is, before the thing all starts inflating, that what Bernanke's going to do is just keep raising the rates that he's paying on the excess reserves, and then DoddFrank is going to make these banks have to keep all sorts of excess reserves, and so you're sort of a roundabout way of increasing the reserve requirement. So I don't really think that we're going to get the price inflation that people are talking about. I mean, we could get 5–6%, but I don't even think we get Jimmy Carter price inflation.
Today, gold is roughly $1,720 an ounce. Where do you see the price of gold heading in this year?
It's another one of those, right?
And your remarks are being recorded.
Right. I mean, the problem with gold is, in buying gold, I mean, it's a speculative play right now. And so if you think a lot of other people think there's going to be a price inflation, and you think that a lot of other people are going to go to gold, then buy gold, right? And if you think what's going to happen is Bernanke's going to raise the excess, you know, the reserve requirement on banks, and you think that what's going to happen is our price is going to stabilize, well, then gold might be at its peak. I mean, gold has this whole speculative ability, and you don't know what they're going to do on how much you can leverage on gold, right? They just changed that requirement, and what happened? You have the price of gold drop $200 an ounce when they changed how much you had to put down to buy gold, and so you don't. I mean, there's a lot of uncertainties about what the regulations are on gold. I mean, some people have talked about going back to the gold standard and the like, but you know, it's hard to tell what's going to happen to gold. I don't own any of those things, but and I own no gold.
Given your remarks on the Federal Reserve and Congress sending mixed signals to the markets, is Ron Paul administration our best option?
Ron Paul's very interesting. I wrote a piece in one of those in something. National Review, yeah. I wrote a piece in National Review on whether Ron Paul's idea of getting rid of the Federal Reserve is a crazy idea. And basically said, look, there's a lot of economic theory out there that says that's a grand idea. In fact, Hayek, who won the Nobel Prize in 1974, wrote several papers at the end of his career about privatizing money. So it's not a crazy thing to say that we should get rid of the Fed, but you know, he's not going to win. But what I find interesting about Ron Paul is that if you look at his crowds, he really appeals to college-age kids. And I think that's exciting. I think it's exciting that people who can articulate free market capitalism can be persuasive to kids that are in college today. So I think that's a real positive.
If, as you say, Adam Smith says, people are acting in their own selfish interest and will prosper in spite of what the government does, how do you account for the collapse of the Soviet Union?
Well, the Soviet Union collapsed. Well, okay, first of all, we have to be careful about selfish and self-interest, right? Mother Teresa fits in very well in a market capitalist system, right? Because all she wants, we just presume that when people are acting, they're trying to make themselves better off in their own view. So if you want to give all your stuff away and take care of the poor and it makes you feel better than doing the opposite, then you're you're acting in your self-interest. You're not being selfish. What happened in, see, the Soviet Union collapsed because it didn't allow people, what Adam Smith said, right? Now, they really went, oh, right. I mean, Adam Smith says, well, the government, if the government doesn't, can goof up a lot of stuff. But he had not seen the Soviet Union, right? I mean, but he hadn't seen feudalism, right? And it had moved away from feudalism. And that's what he noticed, is that's why it was called an inquiry into the nature and causes of the wealth of nations. Why is it that we're so rich here in Scotland, and they're so poor in the rest of the world? What he said was, liberty, individual liberty, and people voluntarily exchanging things leads to great wealth for the masses, and not just for the rich, just for the masses.
The recession has ended. We're in a recovery. How is recession measured, and how is recovery measured?
Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, the recession is measured by the National Bureau of Economic Research. And basically, if you have 2 quarters in a row of a decline in real gross domestic product, that's a recession. Now, that's not quite accurate. They look at other things. But that's a general rule of what we mean by a recession. So the economy in the second quarter of 2009 only declined by 0.7%. And it was positive starting in the third quarter of 2009 and has been positive since then. So that's why the recession ended there. And that's why I'm saying this is a labor market recession. The economy, in terms of producing goods and services, has done well. But in the labor market, it's just not done well in the labor market.
I think this might be rhetorical. Are you in favor of increasing taxes on the upper 1%, the rich?
Yeah, that's a good one. Here's the deal. If you had you could tax Warren Buffett. You could increase tax on Warren Buffett. You could increase taxes on Bill Gates, and they're not going to change their behavior. But that's not who we're taxing, all of whom we're taxing when we put taxes on the rich. When we're putting taxes on the rich, we're taxing the guy that's sitting in the back of the classroom at MIT and deciding whether to drop out and start the equivalent of Facebook, right? How many in here have ever been on Facebook? I know, you're sort of sneaking, yeah, I got a minute, right? What happened? The guy drops out of school to go take a risk, right? How many in here have ever used anything that Bill Gates, Microsoft? How many of you have used a Microsoft product? Right? Okay? How many in here have ever paid to hear me speak? See? That's why Bill Gates is rich and I'm not. It's not rocket science up here. Okay? What are we trying to do by lowering taxes on the rich? What's going to happen? You're going to make it so that people are going to be innovative and take on risk. A lot of you raised your hand when you started your own business or ran your own business. What does that take? Enormous risk. I was just talking to my friend today when we were at lunch. How this lady decides she can open up a Japanese restaurant in this industrial part of San Jose. Why in the world she thinks that's going to happen? But she took that risk, right? And she's going to get rewarded by earning economic profit. And if what we do is we tax that away, then what happens? Some people will do it anyway, right? I mean, we invented the printing press without market capitalism. But what happens? What happens in a market process is that you guys take on risk and innovation. And why I want to cut taxes on the rich is that I want to cut taxes on those who aren't rich yet, but are going to be rich. Because the only way to get rich in a market system is to make stuff for other people. Okay? It's a voluntary exchange system. You don't get to make Edsels and make people buy them. Right? It doesn't happen. You have to find something that somebody's going to want, and you got to sell that. And I tell my students that. You got to figure out what service you're going to be able to provide that people are going to want to buy. And the more people you can sell it to, the richer you're going to get. So, if what happens is, China opens up, now I got 1.3 billion more people to sell stuff to. India opens up. Instead of being a socialist system, it's moving to market capital. I got 1 billion more people to sell to. What does that mean? It means my opportunity to get wealthy just enormously increased. Because I used to only be able to sell to 300 million Americans. So what we should expect? We should expect the very wealthy to get really, really wealthy. Because the only way they're getting really, really wealthy is to make lots of stuff that lots of us can buy. The guys that invented YouTube, they were trying to send their friends a video of a wedding they went to. And they said they were having a lot of trouble doing it, and they thought, I bet a lot of other people are having trouble doing this. And so they invent YouTube, and 18 months later they sell it for $1.6 billion. Right? Now, why is that? Because if I ask how many people have ever seen something on YouTube, you're all going to raise your hand. Right? So it's important to lower taxes on the rich, not because the existing rich. Somehow I could say, oh, all you people that have already thought of something clever, I'm going to tax you guys. But anybody else out there trying to take a risk, we're not going to tax you. If you could do it that way, that'd be great. But you can't. I don't know who the guy is or who the lady is. Some girl, sitting at Hillsdale College is going to invent something. But I'll tell you what, there are people right now thinking about what you're going to want for Christmas 2 years from now, and you don't even know what it is. Guarantee it. There's somebody out there doing that right now. And if what we do is we tax the rich, if we go out and go after the 1%, which is sort of odd because in 2007 to 2009, 1/3 of the 1% were in the 1% again. So like, who are the 1% that we don't like? Okay? But the point is that tax everything, people respond to incentives. And this whole thing about taxing the rich is nuts. You want people to not tax the rich because you want people to become rich because they become rich by making stuff for you.
Just want to say that we got 3 to 4 times as many questions as we have in the past month, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're going to certificate of appreciation.